you recently joined us. If you were at Spinach, I'm going to do a little bit of what I presented at Spinach because I figured it may be a nice way to start the discussion. I haven't done a discussion at demo camp, and the one before was open structure. So I was like, I don't really have a model. So hopefully this works. My plan is to kind of give us an overview, and then we'll have space for like actually discussing. So open space. So without further ado, I've spoken a little bit today, answered some questions or asked some questions, but I wanted to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Adania Flemming. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Florida. I am in the Department of Biology. I'm also in the Florida Museum of Natural History, and I'm a research assistant with IDIC Bio. And if you want to contact me, here's my information. I'll come up later on, but I'm on Twitter, not very active as I used to be, but I am on there. Adania in Science, and aflemming@ufl.edu is my email address. And today I'll be talking a lot about Black and Natural History Museums, and I put the different names that you might see. The full name is Black and Natural History Museums. It's also Black in NHMS, and then Black in BINH. So these are the acronyms that we use. And so if you're like, wait, is that the same thing? It is, because acronyms is something, but I think I stick to Black and Natural History Museums, the second one in most of the presentation. And so, like I said, I'm going to give a little bit of background, which will include my positionality, some introduction before I talk about how Black and Natural History Museum was founded. And then the hope is to have a discussion in terms of how you can be involved and how you can get others to be involved and how you can support or collaborate. And so with that, one second, let me switch, have some screen here. Okay, perfect. So given the company I am in, and this is the part that you would have seen at Spinach if you were there, you all will likely agree that natural history collection contains a lot of stuff. Molly kind of alluded to that in her talk before. There are rich opportunities for research, they're understanding the bias of the planet, they allow us to advance our scientific knowledge and tackle global problems. And they can even be used to teach students to research in STEM or education aspect of things, as much of the conversation today has been about and probably will continue to be about. And so the theory and the caveat often is everybody knows this, right? Everybody knows that, but duty. And so this is where I want to step in and introduce myself a little bit further, my positionality. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, which is a twin island nation in the Caribbean, and I'm part of a nuclear family, which I left to pursue a marine science degree in 2007 at the University of Tampa in Tampa, Florida. And I went on to work at the Florida Aquarium during my junior year, and then I worked there as a paid employee once I graduated from undergrad. And I stumbled across natural history museums, essentially trying to apply for grad school and being intimidated by the process of having to know exactly what you want to do, exactly what question, and convince somebody that you know this and what you're going to do with that. And so Charlotte Jermaine was the person I got introduced to by my current husband, who introduced me to natural history collections. And I sought out opportunities in collections before getting my master's in ichthyology and completing a life history study on ETS for me. And I'm currently a PhD candidate, like I noted, in biology, working on continuing my ichthyology work. And I'm currently testing this species hypothesis using typical systematic methods. But given my experiences in museums, I've also added a component of biological education research, which is where Black and Natural History Museum kind of comes in, because I interrogate museums as a resource to broaden representation of historically excluded people in STEM. So, and that kind of summarizes that aspect of things. I am also a member of the African diaspora as a result of my ancestors being forcibly enslaved and ripped from their home and everything they knew. And so through slavery and colonialism, as I just showed here, many specimens and artifacts are taken aboard slave ships, including places like my homeland. So Trinidad and Tobago here, as you see this for the country. Thankfully, IDIC Bio as aggregator, you can see different institutions, even though it's mainly shown one here, there's multiple institutions who have collections from Trinidad. And so I bring this up because though these collections were taken back then, it's worth noting we gained independence in 1962 from British colonists after being ruled by many, including Spanish, French, Dutch, and nonetheless, growing up home, when I said I left home in 2007, through college, when I graduated in 2011, I did my aquarium in 2012. I had no idea that museums or natural history collections existed in the way that it does today, despite these artifacts being traveled from my home so many years prior. And so it wasn't until I enrolled for grad school, I realized that they existed. And it really wasn't until a way after that I understood what this existence meant and was able to grasp the concepts of it. And so given that some of my work, and Molly shared this earlier, is understanding the power and potential of natural history collections. One of my chapters, I focused on a model which can be used as a resource to broaden representation in STEM, thinking about the potential to increase the racial and ethnic diversity of students through experiential learning and mentorship in museums. And prior to this publication, it's been used in other places, even though before it was published, such as the IDIC Bayou and the Florida Museum Internship and the IDIC Trio Conference that we have in Florida. And so the course really was it's created to encourage folks to review the components because there are multiple applications of use outside of course-based aspects. And so while developing this chapter, I realized that many students, even those on campus with the huge natural history museums, such as the Florida museums, were unaware of the existence and the capacity of museums. And this is the same, I think, across the globe as I run into people who are like, oh, museums. And I think it was Miranda who talked about it earlier. You know, a lot of people might know of museums as public spaces, but not the research collections. And some people have no idea about it in its entirety. And so thinking about that, one of the main aspects is, how do we, knowing this, given various spaces, both academic and non-academic, I've realized there are many individuals who are unaware of museums, not just students. And this is true for historically excluded people, particularly true for this group. Noteworthy, many historical people are aware, even some individuals have occupied and still occupy spaces. But from my research findings, retentions of these individuals that have traversed the space, whether as undergrads, grads, postdocs, or lab techs, is an issue. And so part of this lies in finding a sense of community and belonging in museums. Another aspect is whether these individuals feel welcome, whether institutions have moved beyond the DEI statements to truly consider multiple facets. And so given that, you might be like, why does this all matter? Hopefully it matters, especially given the conversation that we're having thus far today and the ones we'll have later. But for when I presented at Spinach, the main reason it mattered for that audience, and I think it's the same here, is because the symposium I presented, it talked about significant work remains to create inclusive spaces. And Molly's presentation before is a good idea, a good aspect of that. And I argue here that this is true, and that we need to start with thinking there is a problem, but what is the problem? What is the work that we need to do? Who are the people that are excluded and why have they been excluded? What will benefit or who will benefit from their intentional, and the key word here is intentional inclusion, and how do we develop an approach to that group of people? And so I argue that many institutions have thought about this, maybe discussed it, but they skip responding to it and essentially do a catch-all. And so for my research, I'm really looking at what are the experiences of historical people in natural history museums, and how can we use the experiences to build healthy communities. And so before doing that, there's multiple groups who have been excluded from museums, whether entirely or in part. For example, here I'm showing on the first floor of the American Museum of Natural History, a diagram that depicts a 17th century meeting between Dutch settlers and the Lenape, an indigenous tribe inhabited New Amsterdam, now called New York City. And it was intended to show a diplomatic negotiation between the groups, but the portrayal tells a different story. Diagram actually depicts cultural hierarchy, not a cultural exchange. And this is one aspect that can help shape the American public understanding of indigenous people. And there's a lot we can discuss here, but I'd simply like to know, instead of removing it entirely, they acknowledged it was problematic by putting signs and pointing out the aspects that needed to be said. So to me, this example means, for a variety of reasons, some time was taken to discuss this exhibit and the communities it impacted, despite the well-intentioned or historically uninformed or culturally unaware perspective. And if people be like, wait, I heard all of this already, I'm almost done through the formal part, the main aspects to think about and highlighted before, there are complex examples of how people have been historically excluded and discussion of what we can do moving forward, such as a Das and Low paper. And Rebecca Kim did a really good presentation at Spinach about some aspects of this, also highlighting this paper. Miranda Lowe was in the audience at the time. And then there's been a subsequent blog, an Aska blog, highlighting many hidden figures, and there's more out there. Molly pointed to some of these in her presentation as well. And so with that, really thinking about the fact that why do we not do a catch-all? Because one size doesn't fit all. We need to really know who we're missing, define them as a group. And I talked to the presentation about my advisor seeing, I've been doing some of this work and it's really been a side passion project. And so to that extent, I'll tell you why, is because from my own experience, working in natural history museums as a Black woman in the field of ichthyology, and essentially being a Black woman in the US. And this might be similar for folks in other parts of the world. Having been in community with my colleagues, it is very apparent other places as well, but I'm speaking from my perspective, having moved from the Caribbean to the US. And so it was apparent that people would not, that to me, that Black people were one of the historically excluded people. And though it, at first it didn't quite understand why, because several well-established non-Black people kept telling me that it was because Black people just weren't interested in biodiversity or natural connections. Maybe medicine was what they or we pursued, and there's truth in that, the medical pursuits of people of color, but I was still questioning why, even as I immersed myself in natural history museums and did all the outreach, I still didn't see myself represented in spaces. And it was at these junctures, I reflected on the fact that having grown up in the Caribbean, I had always identified as Trinidadian or Trini, but I was referred to as an alien, Black, or African American, and subjected to all the cultural stigmatisms that those identities face. So learning the history of African Americans helped me to understand why I had many of these encounters, and many of you might have been learning some of those histories after 2020 or prior to that may have known. And for some quick examples, speaking about my experience, this was my lab when I did my master's degree, except for Molly. Molly was IDIC Bio, but Molly was always like part of our career as a former ichthyology member. So essentially, you can see the difference between myself and my colleagues. They were wonderful, but this was the experience I was having. When I went to my ichthyology opportunity conference, it was vastly similar in terms of the racial and ethnic diversity. And then my first Spinach conference, I was like, well, I'm going to an international conference. It's going to be so different. And it wasn't. This is me at Spinach. And it's a little blurry because I took the picture just not necessarily meaning it for research purposes, but if you can look behind, it's similar in terms of the people that you see. And a couple of years later, going to Spinach this year, it was vastly the same aspect of things. And so really, I am looking at what are the experiences of Black people and how can we use these experiences to build healthy communities? And so parts of that for me was founding Black and Natural History museums, because I wanted to, as a research aspect, wanted to understand these stories and understand these aspects using a phenomenological approach, but I need to find people. And so 2023 actually marks our second year as this year as a 501c nonprofit. It will be a third annual event. And so we are a 501c3 nonprofit, sorry. We are all about celebrating and building community for Black folks working in or adjacent to natural history museums, encouraging and facilitating Black people's participation in natural history museums, professionally and as patrons, and engaging non-Black people as true colleagues and co-conspirators to Black and natural history museum professionals. This is really where most of the folks in this space will come in, that engagement. And so a big part of things, people are like, oh, Black and natural history museums. It isn't for me, that is not correct. And hopefully, as I move forward and we move to discussion, we can talk about ways that, what that means and how people can collaborate, support, and show up in different ways. And so before moving on, if you're one of those tech savvy people and you're like, I want to make sure I have the concept right now because this sounds good, I'll pause for a minute. This is my calling card, my digital calling card. So you can find my information there, my email, my Twitter account, and different ways to contact me. And then this is ways to contact or assist or support Black and Natural History museums. This is directly assisting if you're like, well, I want to either donate time, resources. And if you're like, well, I just want to give money, there's also the donate option. So I'll give a couple more seconds here in case you want to use that. And I'll share links later as well, but I wanted to make sure I pause for this because I think connecting is important. And then with that, this is a little stretched out. This was the poster I created for Spinach, and I feel like it's a really good summary to kind of move us into discussion about Black and Natural History museums and how people can support not just the annual event coming up, but the entire organization. It's a 501c nonprofit, as I said before. So it's going to be in existence for hopefully a long time in perpetuity. And so really a big part of it is having support, network collaborations with folks who are in natural history museums across the globe. And so I'm not going to obviously read this verbatim, but I shared the vision just now in the slide, right? The need to celebrate, to support, and to engage with folks who are non-Black in natural museums. And so really we want to inspire Black professionals worldwide to imagine their relationships with the world. And the things I want to share is one of our focal aspects is our community conversation. And so these started off as for Black folks only. And so we would have conversations. The first, we talked about mentors and finding mentors as a Black person in natural history museums, but we've since changed these to having, it's like research and community conversations, or I should just say people and community conversations. We're trying to figure out the best name for it. So essentially it starts off with somebody in our community sharing what they do. And that could be somebody who's doing research, somebody doing education, somebody doing, there's lawyers. I didn't know that before, there's lawyers in natural history collections. And so sharing their position, their research, what they do, how they do the natural history collections. So we, as a community, both the Black folks and folks who are non-Black in collections get to meet these people and hear what they're doing and hopefully find ways to connect and collaborate. And then thereafter, we have the community conversation. So from that talk, we break out, and the upcoming talk is going to be about actually finding community in museums. And it's going to be, it's going to be shared this week, as it will be done July 27th by Hank Bart from Tulane University. So that's one of our big pillars, the community conversation. And would love to have folks join that and share. I think, as I noted before, people are like, well, this isn't for me because it says Black, but it is for you. We are trying to engage with folks, Black and non-Black in natural history collections, to allow us to accomplish our vision and our mission. And then the annual events, I think that was largely what was noted as the point of discussion here. But I think all of what I said before hopefully feeds into this. Our annual event, it started in 2021. We're about to have a third event, and we're excited to have it, but we really need people to help us get things done. And so I'd love to chat with folks about different ways to be involved. I'll share the website in a minute so you can see what we've done in the past, and we have some really neat ideas for the future. And we're looking at moving this from a virtual event to an in-person event. And one of the aspects of that is also having people have local events at their museums to engage with local folks in their spaces. And so there's lots of ways to collaborate about that aspect of things. And so right now, in terms of future, we're drafting our strategic plan. As I noted, it isn't just a flyby. We plan on being here for a while. And so there's a lot of ways to collaborate, to support, to network with us. And so that's essentially where I want to move the conversation, is sort of what's next. And I'd love to hear people's ideas and thoughts of what we're doing so far, if you've been able to engage, how you'd like to engage, and what else we can do. And so with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can move into discussion forum. And hopefully that was enough to kind of give you, if you're like, I didn't know about this, now you do. Tell somebody, tell your colleagues, reach out to us and let us know how we can support. Thanks, Jen. I already shared the website. How would you like them to reach out?
Adania, how would you like them to reach out?
So like the first thing I'm going to share is, I just shared a survey that is, oh, I didn't share it. That's the survey. So there's a survey there that literally tells you how, like, you can decide how you can get in, how you can get involved. So I know we all want to do things, but there's always how much capacity you have. So that survey walks you through, okay, I can share time, I can share resources, I can point you to somebody else. I don't have the time, but they can share resources, or I can give you money because I don't have any of that time or resources. And so there's that aspect of things. You can also email me. That's why I shared my email before directly. And we have the Black and Natural History Museum's email as well. And that was all in that calling card shared before, and I can bring that back up. I realized I didn't actually share my closing slide, which has all the information. So I can share that as well. But what I wanted to do for the discussion part, and we have about 10 minutes, because I think it was, I feel like my story is important, and like why, because people are like, oh, this is just like a Black and X thing that happened because of COVID in 2020 and had nothing to do. And I was like, it's a little bit more than that. It's really a passion project, like I said, multiple times, I think, and it's a beautiful space. But one of the things that's really poignant is that there aren't a lot of Black people in natural history museums in high positions. We just had the second director, Sean, the curator at the AMNH, and there is a woman, and I did it again at, it's like a natural science museum, but it is natural history museum. And there are a couple of curators, but we aren't there. And so what we do need people who are in there at all positions to realize that it's not on us to help change the spaces and make it so that we want to stay. Is on our colleagues to work with us and to work with people to encourage folks to join and celebrate and communicate with the folks who are there. And I don't know what people's identities are, but it's one of people to think about, like, is there parts of you that you can't share or you have to hold back because of the space you're in? And what does that feel like? And if there's a part of you that you can share, or but you like, wait, does the history of museums conflict with this? And so those are some of the things that, we want to actively talk about. And museums have all these missions and goals and all the idea statements. And so really want to be like, how can your colleagues help us ensure that those aren't just statements, but actionized aspects? And so that's a lot of talking. So I'm gonna pause because I kept saying discussion and I keep talking. So any thoughts, comments, suggestions for collaborations, working with people? And thank you.
I have a comment discussion point, but don't want to take up space if other people in the attendance group have things to discuss. Okay, but I will, because nobody's saying anything. So Adania, I don't know if you've talked with Hadil, but Hadil is here at Michigan. So when I saw, I think one of your first emails go around, I was like, oh, we need to do something. Let me help you do something. So we've only done a little bit of brainstorming about what we might be able to do here at Michigan. And I've kind of pulled the collection staff, but I figured if I share my ideas, maybe other people can build upon them or take the ideas completely. I don't care. But we were thinking about trying to figure out how to, we do these like tours all the time of our collection facility because we have 4 museums here. So Herbarium, Museum of Zoology, Museum of Anthropological Archaeology, and then the Museum of Paleontology. We do tours for students where we send out like, fancy, like the eye-catching objects. We've done tours for administrators, which are more research-based. So I was like, well, why don't we already have the structure to do these tours. Why don't we just sub out the showy items or research items and sub them in for contributions by Black people or people of color in general, and have like little showcases in each of the different collections. So right now we have buy-in from collection staff to help. We don't have funds yet to do the event because we'll need to figure out how to get people to our building. Do we have like a little intro talk that describes the organization and what it's doing and all of that? But it seems like not a big ask, and we have, but similar, like it goes off of what you're talking about. And then Molly's hidden kind of people discussion. It's, you kind of have to dig through, like wade through a lot of the elderly white people to get to the people of color. And that's the hard part. But everybody seems positive and willing to give it a go. So it's just a matter of now doing the effort to showcase the individuals and figuring out how to actually get people to come to the event.
Yeah, and we're excited about that. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because it is one way people are like, well, what do I do? How do I help? And so that is one exact way is we want people in museums, in their local museums, to work with us in doing things. And so like Khadil is a member of the board. And so yeah, Jen, we're super excited to see what's to come. And we've been talking about different aspects of it and looking forward to seeing what's happening. So if you're like, wait, let me talk to Jen and figure out how did you, sometimes you're like, well, how do I even start this? And so I love just Jen sharing, because that might be a good way to think about, well, how did you even ask for this? Because we're like, well, can I ask for this? What did you do? So Jen, I'm volunteering you. Hopefully that's the key. Chat with that, Jen, if that sounds great and you want to do that. And Molly's reminding me that in line with that, we actually have our first exhibit. The Black and Natural History Museum is collaborating with the Florida Museum of Natural History. So we're going to have our first exhibit. It's going to be open in October. So the plan is in line for this annual event. And we're planning to have that exhibit be a traveling exhibit thereafter, because the collaboration it's mainly the graphic designer who designed our logo. Alicia Blackwell is the main person creating all the content. We're going to have to own that content. And so it'll be at the Florida Museum, but thereafter, and there'll be links to it on our website, even though the Florida Museum will also have a link that send them to our website. So they're trafficking to our website. That's how they're collaborating with us. But then when it's done, it's going to be a traveling exhibit that we'll have. And so we're looking at, okay, now we're going to line up as we develop a strategic plan, which museums are going to have this next and how are we going to organize that? So that's not only be like, oh, maybe you're like, I don't have the time to do all this cool stuff. There'll also be that option to have this traveling exhibit, but it can both happen at the same time or at different points, because not everybody can have the exhibit at one point. And where we have, I think it's 16 people highlighted in an exhibit. So there's multiple aspects of it. In the treasure hunt where you go find the people in different parts of the exhibit. And so that might change in museum. So there's ways to also like build on it as we're traveled through it. And I don't know, time just seems to be so elusive. I realized I shared a link to the website, but I didn't actually share the website. So just real quick, I'm going to share the website. Right now I'm on the community conversations page, but I want to just point you to the fact that you can go on here. If you go to the about page, it'll be typical kind of everything. If you go to our board page, I was like, why isn't it loading? You can see who the board is. So like I noted, I am the founder and the president, but we have people across different museums that are here as part of the board. The thing I talked about earlier in that a big part of what we're doing, and so this is the part that Molly shared in the Hidden Figures, is we are about sharing folks. And so the folks, there's a lot of different profiles here. You can go look at them. I'll be adding to this. Once we finish the exhibit, there'll be even more people adding here. And so one of the things we need help with is finding these people, getting their stories, creating them. So if you're like, how can I help? That's one way you can help. Our social media is definitely a place where we're looking for people because it's a lot to manage social media. And so we're all volunteers, that board I showed you. And so having people actually help us, we have a team, which Molly's a part of, which is our coordinators of what we're about to have a Black and Natural History Museums colleagues, or it might be friends of Black and Natural History Museums. And so look out for information there because we're looking to have institutions be members and be able to involve in one ways, but also have people be able to help. And either way, it will need individuals, people like yourself, to be like, oh, let me chat with somebody, let me make this happen. Because here's our members, some of our members, and we constantly updating this because people are joining. And so one of the main aims is to find people and to find ourselves. And as you go through, you'll realize it is global. So you have people from kind of across the space. And if you haven't been to one of our annual events, you can go look, you can see this is the upcoming one is October 15th to 21st, but you can go check out the past events. We do share, so this first one, you can go back and look at the links to different things. So check out the Twitter for what we're talking about, or the behind the scenes tours. You got to see different positions in museums. And so the stuff is there. And this is also something we can use help with, is curating these spaces. If you're like, again, how can I help? I'm telling you, we can take help in multiple ways. We started off doing a job share opportunities, and we changed it to sharing links and such. Sorry, it's going quickly. So we're sharing instead like these links, and it changes because jobs change all the time. But essentially, there are multiple ways to contribute and help. And if you're missed anything I said and you're like, well, what is this all about? You can go back to our board page and get the mission and vision, and we'll story about how I funded it and that board I showed before. And then at the end, we do have that aspect of the quick links. So how to become a member if you are Black and Natural History Museums and know somebody, and you don't have to necessarily be in museums, just adjacent to. So if you've worked in museums and there's only so many positions and you're like, I'm no longer there, but I use all the stuff and do all the stuff or whatever, or you're like, I really want to be, but I can never get hired. This is also space for you or for them. So, all right, I talked really quickly to 1 o'clock because I didn't see any more comments in the chat or this there. Yeah, so yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us, Adania. And thanks to all the presenters and participants for joining. As Jen said in the chat, we're starting again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern time with the first presentation starting at 10:30 Eastern time. So please join us next time, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.